Good evening, everybody. Welcome to November 23rd's Finance Committee meeting. We're called to order at 6 o'clock p.m. Please note that Mr. Stoughton will not be here this evening as he is on vacation. And Mrs. Bobbitt, anything that Mr. Stoughton was going to second, I'll rely on you to second this evening.
Okay.
We'll start with resolutions. Temporary resolution 123-20. It's a resolution to create a new fund for the .45 police and fire levy 2021 fund and to set up the revenue and expense accounts. This resolution will actually establish a new fund for the police and fire levy and create a revenue account to receive the incoming income tax revenue and expense accounts as needed to expend the incoming revenue. Anything to add, Ms. Nettles? Okay, any questions on 123-20? Okay, Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as my second, and we'll actually have two readings this evening.
Okay.
Next resolution is 124-20. This is a resolution to appropriate the CARES Act funds to cover payroll and benefit expenses of employees substantially dedicated to mitigating and responding to COVID-19 public health emergency. It allows for the reimbursement to departments for their payroll and benefit expenses for employees infected or directly impacted to comply with COVID-19 public health precautions, and it will allow the use of the remaining CARES Act funds to reimburse the police and fire departments on a portion of their payroll and benefits expenses from March 1st to December 30th, 2020. Coming through finance, I have it for one reading. Did I miss anything? Okay, any questions? Okay, Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as my second on that as well.
Okay, thank you.
Temporary resolution 125-20. This is a resolution to increase receipts and appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the local coronavirus relief fund and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor. This resolution will actually allow the city of Lancaster to receive additional CARES Act funds due to the Fairfield County Auditor's Office redistributing the countywide unused CARES Act funds, and it will establish the revenue and expense budget for the same. The estimated amount is $161,297.98. I have it also for one reading. Did I miss anything? Okay, any questions on 125-20? All right, moving on. Temporary resolution 126-20 is a resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance for the stormwater utility fund. It's to increase the appropriation in the stormwater fund, and it's coming through water pollution control, Mr. James.
Yes, I'd like to yield some time to Ms. Denise Cruz to give us a little more explanation of it.
Good evening. This is one of the pieces of legislation I talked to you last meeting. This is to pay for the remainder of our capital improvement projects for this year. I knew we'd have to do an increase, but I wanted to see how much it was actually going to work out to be. I do have some invoices to pay, and I have to have them to the auditor before your next meeting, so this does need to be passed tonight.
Okay, any questions for Ms. Cruz? So, Mr. James, I have Ms. Teener as your second, but you'll need somebody else.
I'm going to ask Mr. Hall
Okay.
to do that in her place.
And I'm showing one reading, right? You
That's
want
correct.
suspension?
We will ask for suspension tonight, you're correct.
Okay. Moving on to temporary resolution does anybody have any questions for 126-20? I think it's pretty straightforward. And Denise did send an email out to everybody earlier. Okay. 127-20, this is also coming out of water pollution control to pay for damage to a sanitary sewer lateral.
I will yield some time also again to Ms. Denise and let her explain that as well.
All right, the property at 117 North Columbus was having some sanitary issues, and as they investigated, what they found was years ago in the downtown project, their sewer lateral was cut in half during the storm sewer installation and never repaired. And they were not a big water user, so they didn't discover it until now. They, of course, had it repaired since it was their lateral, but it was our fault as the downtown project. So we have a claim. The claim is actually $35,611.37. And again, I have to have invoices before your next meeting, so I need this passed tonight.
Okay. And I have Mr. Hall as the second on this one.
That's correct.
Okay, any questions on 127-20? Okay. Denise has a lot tonight, so. Temporary resolution 128-20. This is for the South Water Plant Concentrate Line Upgrade Project. Mr. James.
Once again, I'll allow this time for Ms. Cruz.
All right, this is a project we've been working on for about a year now. And it's going to modify the concentrate line that brings waste from the South Water Plant up to the city limits and into the Lawrence Street wastewater plant. We are currently not able to have that line function as designed, which is not allowing us to put a second skid in at the South Water Plant and increase capacity there, which is becoming crucial that we get some more capacity down there. So this will allow us to advertise for bids and get that project under construction. Mike would like to have it done before the summer. So
And we'll be asking for one reading on this as well.
I'm going to preface this by saying that we have a no procrastination rule in the office right now because of COVID, and we never know if you're suddenly going to disappear for 2 weeks. So we are asking, if possible, that you can suspend and pass all of our legislation tonight so that we can keep projects moving.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on temporary resolution 128-20? Mr. Hall, I have you as second since Mrs. Teener will not be here this evening.
Thank you.
Temporary resolution 129-20, this is for the Upper Hocking Water Pollution Control Facility Expansion Project. Mr. James.
Once again, I'll allow Ms. Denise to expand on this.
This is the engineering design contract for the Upper Hocking expansion. We're seeing a lot of growth out in the US 33 service area, and it's time to expand the plant. We do kind of have a deadline that we have to have the expansion done by January of 2024, so we're on a really short timeline. We had a conference call with Arcadis today, and there's a number of items we need to deal with Ohio EPA almost immediately, so we would like to get this under contract so we can get started.
One question I'll pose for you is how much more of the construction will have to be added to that building in order to accommodate this? And I know that's a little preliminary from a design standpoint.
No, for the Upper Hocking project, what we're gonna do is double capacity.
Right.
We're currently at about 1.8 MGD on a 2 MGD plant, so we're building the next section. That plant was designed for 4 expansions, so basically it's a duplication of what we have, kind of flipped over and flip side and flip over. So this is the first of the 3 expansions.
Okay, and you're gonna ask for suspension again
That is
on this
correct.
one,
We'll ask
right?
for one reading on this as well.
Does anybody have any questions on 129-20? Okay,
Right, thank you.
thanks Denise.
Thanks, Denise.
Moving on to temporary resolution 130-20, coming out of finance. It's a resolution to decrease and increase the appropriations in the general fund for municipal clerk's office. This resolution is to cover the deficit created by one employee with single coverage being replaced by another employee who opted for family coverage. Does anybody have anything to add for that resolution? I think I covered it. Any questions? Okay, Mrs. Bobbitt, we're gonna ask for suspension on this tonight.
Okay.
Temporary resolution 131-20, a resolution to authorize the issuance of one then and now certificate for payment of an invoice for the gas fund. This resolution is to cover the cost of a damage claim at 348 Garner Lane coming through service. Mrs. Bobbitt, can you speak to it?
Kurt Wade is here this evening. I'd like him to come up and speak on this, please.
Thank you. Good evening. We had a damage out at 358 Garner Lane, seeking authorization for a then and now certificate in the amount of $3,485.46. We do have the funds available, but due to the fact that it's over $3,000, we need authorization from council. Kind of a little background on what happened here. The homeowner was having some issues with their sewer backing up, so they contracted a local company to go out and investigate, and once they investigated, they found that the damage was a result of a gas line that was installed back in 1992 that caused the sewer to eventually collapse. So they contacted gas department. They had a big hole opened up down by the road, so we authorized them to make the repair and get that buttoned up. But they forwarded the invoice to us to pay, and we would like to get that paid, and we are asking for suspension on that.
Yes.
Is that 358 or 348?
It's 358 Garner.
Okay, I'm gonna change that on the legislation.
358 Garner? Okay. And the total again was
$3,485.46.
46 cents. Okay, so Mrs. Bobbitt, I have you as sponsoring that legislation, and who's
And
second?
Jack
Jack.
Matlin will second it, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any questions on 131-20? It's pretty straightforward. Thank you. Next, temporary resolution 132-20. This is a resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Fairfield County General Health District. This will allow us to enter into a one-year agreement for services with Fairfield County General Health District for public health services, costing $333,296.11. I do have one question. Is that an increase over last year? I couldn't find the information.
Yes, it's a 5% increase over last year, which is all the townships and villages and the city are all paying the same increase.
Okay. And I have that 2 readings are okay. So Mr. Stoughton will be the second on that because he'll be back. Any questions on this resolution? This is for a 1-year agreement, so we'll typically see it annually unless we get a larger contract,
Yes.
right?
We try.
Okay. I can't see your smile, Mr. Martin. You
I
have
know.
it covered up.
Well, we try to do a 2-3-year contract right now, but there's so much on the table with COVID, their expenses. So both the District Advisory Council and us, so that's why we're just offering a 1-year agreement at this time.
Okay.
So we'll see how it goes next year. We'll try again for an extended contract, which is good, but we'll see.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any other resolutions to come before finance this evening? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to ordinances. Temporary ordinance 26-20, this is to establish a pay ordinance for 2021 for the municipal court administrator and chief probation officer. Do I have anybody here that can speak to that?
Good evening. If anybody has any questions, I'll answer those. We actually have 2 pay ordinance legislative pieces. The first is for the management, so it covers 4 staff members, and then the other piece is for the non-union, and it covers the remainder of the judicial and probation staff.
And 2 readings is okay, right?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions? So it's 26-20 and 27-20, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yes.
Any questions on either one? Jack?
Not a question, but a comment. I talked to Jackie and the judge earlier. This is the ordinance that changes the way they determine pay raises or pay scale. If you'll read down through section 13, it's got supervisor discretion. I talked to Jackie, and they are planning on implementing a employee evaluation program. They already have one, but they using the merit system in the future for that, which is one of the things I would hope would be put into place, because on surface, it feels like it could leave itself open to, favoritism or something like that. However, with a good evaluation program, I can see where that would work good. So take the time to read this before we pass it, just so you understand the difference between what they used to do and what they want to do.
That's a good clarification, Jack, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, 2 readings on both, and I have Mr. Stoughton on 26-20 and Mrs. Bobbitt on 27-20. All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on to temporary ordinance 28-20. This is to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for management and professional personnel employed by the city and to declare an emergency. Mr. Martin, would you like to elaborate on this one and the next one as well?
So on this one here, as well as the next one, we are reflecting a 3% pay raise for employees here. This is non-union employees. We are currently in negotiations really with about pay for next year for all 5 of our bargaining units. So possibly next year, first, hopefully, sometime early in the next year, we'll have approval for those CBAs, those collective bargaining agreements, a little bit later. We are currently got a lot of work before us about that. So this is only for the non-bargaining unit employees, non-management, and as you see here for the management level, both of them, these ordinances reflect only a 3% pay raise. If you go down to this first one here, I think we are adding a big deal, and I think Holly, you had requested that we send out an email between now and next council for an
Yeah,
explanation.
I'll address that when I get to the budget.
Okay, so if you want me to comment, I mean, the only one I would comment on is the ComTech. We're trying to bring a 13th, a manager position in our communication technician in the 911 center. We've been wanting to do that for quite a few years. And so we want to honor and respect the levy that was passed to try to do the right things in our police and fire departments, and this is one of those issues. So that's a new position that's not been in our pay ordinances before. That's down there. And so it's just the pay ranges and the steps are still the same. We've not changed any of those from last year. So any other questions, maybe? Is that enough for both of them? We'll get an email out with better explanation on the positions that we are creating new. It's not many. I don't think we have that many at all. So we'll be better prepared to email for you.
So the question hasn't been asked, but I'll provide the answer. There are no increases for elected officials in this year's budget.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on those two pay ordinances? Mrs. Bobbitt?
Well, I should probably just wait for your email, because I do have a question on some of these that we are changing, you know.
Sure.
So I'll wait for your email,
Okay,
okay?
sure.
Jack?
So we talked at some place about the community development going to some full-time people. That's correct, right? And that's what's in this ordinance for the assistant executive director?
That's correct. There are two positions that are going from part-time to full-time because of the additional grants that were gotten. So in addition to the ongoing CDBG grant, there is a CARES Fund CDBG appropriation, which stretches over the next couple of years, and also the lead abatement grant that we got for $1.4 million stretches over 3 years. So that's a lot of additional work. So the two part-time employees in community development will be going to full-time, and there's an additional part-time administrative person in the pay ordinance for that department also.
But their pay salaries is grant money.
Yes,
paying,
oh,
it's
yeah,
not-
community development is, all the positions are funded by the grants
Okay.
that they receive.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
That was gonna be my question. So I guess I'll just ask you now, on the executive director, we're changing that from a 15 to 16. What was Mary Jo Smith?
That I'd have to go back and
Okay,
research.
I'll go
That
back
I
and
don't
look.
know. She
Okay.
was probably at 15, because I think
I think she was
the new
way up.
director came in at
She
the
was
same
way up in the
level.
20s. She'd been here for
Yeah.
some time.
Oh, okay. That I don't know.
Okay.
All right, while we're there, if you look at 2920, the customer service coordinator and utilities collection office, I don't know if that's another question. That's a new position we're adding. So we've had a full-time temporary employee there for several years, and I need to make this a permanent employee. I cannot see us not needing that. We have about 1.5 temporaries that come in there. Our workload is monumental, so I have been recommending that we make that position. That's not a general fund position, that's a enterprise department funded position by the other enterprises. But we'll have an email just talking a little bit more about that.
Mr. Wood? President Wood?
Well, and we'll come back to Ms. Bobbitt, I think, but let me just encourage, we got one more shot at this, and so this is where we're making the sausage right now. If you look at the agenda, we're not getting out of here anytime soon tonight. And so let me just encourage you to ask the questions you want to ask now, because when we get to the third reading of this, it's my hope that we're going to be able to just move forward. If we do have emails that come out, if everyone who is responding to those can be sure to reply all. If someone has a question, it's
Yes.
likely that many have a question, and so to be able to see all of those questions and answers would be beneficial to the group, so that we're not rehashing things as we continue forward. And so let me just encourage you to ask your questions now, because when we get to the main part of the meeting, it's going to be first reading, and we're going to keep on going. And so now's the time. Thank you.
And just to follow that, I'll just go ahead and put the request out there so everybody knows what the request is that in writing, we would like to have by next Friday, justification for any and all range adjustments and new added positions in writing. Okay?
That's good.
That's the request.
Yes.
Okay. Mrs. Bobbitt.
So, going back to the job under Sherry Nixon, you said that it's been a full-time job, but not an employee of the city, is that correct?
So it's through a temporary service, and we have been, sometimes it was not 40 hours a week, but as the few years have gone on. So what I'm doing is I'm restoring a previous position that was eliminated out of that department about 10 years ago. But now the growth of the city and the demands that we're having there, and we're especially right in the midst of this year where we're now working on a new software for that department, so the needs are great there. So this is restoring a former position at the same range that we had before. It's kind of a coordinator of all those at that front window, plus any of the billers in the back. And trust me, I know all of my departments, and I'm really involved with the operations. This one especially because they're right next door to me. I see the volumes, the traffic, the issues that we face there. So I think it's time that I put that position back in because they will help our two managers and just coordinate some of the things. There's a lot of reasons. You know, when you have somebody temporary and you're working them 40 hours a week, it's time to make it a full-time position. And I think our time is now.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Mr. McDaniel.
You mind if I expand on your Comtech position, because I think I can explain
Yes.
that pretty. So the mayor had put the Comtech position, Comtech supervisor position, in his proposal to the public on why we wanted to raise taxes as one of the packages that we need. This is a long time proposal by chiefs going all the way back, probably to Chief Lutz. Currently, our Comtechs, we have 12 of them, four assigned to each watch. They're supervised essentially by 9 different patrol supervisors. So when you come in one day, the captain's in charge of the 4 on duty, et cetera, et cetera. When the captain's off, lieutenant's in charge. When both those are off, the sergeant's in charge, and there's 9 different ways of doing things. It's a very technical job, very important job, a lot of training involved, a lot of certifications involved. This position will allow a supervisor to directly oversee what is a significant operation for the Lancaster Police Department and Fire Department and EMS. So this is long past due and desperately needed. So I just wanted to put my 2 cents in there. If anyone has any additional questions, Chief Blar can answer those, but this is something that's been needed for many, many years. So that's all I have.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay. So we have, ordinance 29-20, 30-20, for 2 readings, as well as 31-20, which is the, Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court, we didn't really talk about that too much. The Information Technology Administrator, Mr. Martin,
So that is in courts, actually.
that's in the court.
Correct. That's a separate position under courts. They work well, Andy works well with our IT department, but it's a segregated position out under the clerk of courts, actually. And there's a lot of good reasons why that is, probably mostly just to guarantee that things are kept private, I would have to say. So this is a standalone ordinance for that one position that you're noticing. And that's an annual piece that we introduce.
Okay, does anybody have any questions on 31-20? These will all be 2 readings. Okay, last one on the list, 32-20, an ordinance to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with GridSmart for traffic management cameras coming through Public Works. Mr. Schoonover.
So there's some end of the year pricing here that LDOT can take advantage of for some of our traffic management cameras and some replacement parts. So that's why this ordinance is here. There's no one else that we can purchase this stuff from, so that's why we're wanting to ask to dispense with the competitive bidding and then ask for suspension so we can get these purchased at the discounted rate before the end of the year. I wasn't going to do it, but if you have any questions, I'll have Greg come up with Charlie, and Charlie's never been in front of the group to answer questions before, so I figured I'd
I
throw.
think that's a great idea.
I told him I wouldn't do it at the beginning, but as I've been sitting here, I thought, well, Greg can introduce him to the group, and then if you guys have questions about traffic management and some of the camera systems we use, I think traffic around town is always like a big
Good evening.
issue.
Charlie Mullet, he's our traffic control supervisor. He's the one that is working to try to streamline some of this stuff. So that being said, I'm gonna hand it over to him.
Thanks. Good evening, everybody.
Don't take too long.
I won't.
Let's go.
I'll just give you the short and sweet of it. Basically, these are, we have 28 total intersections out of 80 in the city of Lancaster that we use these cameras for detection and counting purposes. And if you will, the 12 that need replaced are like a Gen 1. You can think of your old cell phone as opposed to a new cell phone. We're wanting to replace these. We've got an opportunity to do this at a substantial savings with end-of-the-year pricing. We wanted to take advantage of that.
So they are cameras mounted on a pole above the lights. It's a 360 fisheye. I'm going to take advantage, a little education here on this part. Sometimes when you sit at a light and you don't see something turn when you see a car over there, sometimes the shadows of a building can interfere with the motion, but they're basically detecting the motion of the traffic that's gone into those lanes of going forward or turning left or right. And so some people question, why isn't it turning when I'm sitting there, or why did it miss me? So it's supposed to not to do that, but just to let you know, the updating these cameras should help improve some of the things, the software will be able to talk to these cameras better as we move to a different generation. And we're looking forward to seeing our lights and even improve more to flow traffic even better. You know, just, we're still not done tweaking everything.
No, not even close.
But my office hears a lot of times some questions about, I've been stuck at this traffic, the mayor and I experience it ourselves. So we're trying to always improve the flow of traffic through our city as it grows.
Absolutely. Yeah, these units normally run $10,180 each. We've got an opportunity to pick them up at $7,000 apiece. It's a savings of $38,160. And like Paul said, it's the Gen 1 units that we're trying to replace, they've pretty much exceeded what the software capabilities are of them. So by replacing them, we can address some of those issues like shadowing and sunspots and different things like that.
Charlie, what was that savings figure again, please?
The total savings figure would be $38,160.
Thank you.
So an effective method I have when I bring my car to the stop and I look at that light, I tap my brakes just slightly so that car makes a little wiggle. I'm not going through the light, I'm not going past the stop bar, but I'm always doing a little motion, just to give you a little tip that I found very helpful to make sure I don't get skipped on our turning of lights, so.
President Ohl.
So it wasn't long ago that we just spent a bunch of money to upgrade the whole system, right? Had multiple systems, 3 different things, didn't talk to each other. Now we have one system, right?
That's correct.
And is it talking to itself?
Right now,
Yeah.
what you're referring to is the Centrac system. That's the actual traffic management system itself. And yes, you are correct. The old system used to break the city up into different zones, and every zone was kind of proprietary of its own. The Syntrax system has brought everything in together, and a lot of the reason why we're trying to move forward with these cameras is for count data and different things like that we can utilize to help the flow of traffic.
But does the system use the cameras?
Yes, it does.
So how does it know what to do with the other lights without the cameras?
You still have detection at those, regardless whether it be like loop detection.
In the street?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So is it gonna like we had talked about how you were just gonna be able to like, you know, an ambulance, for example, was just gonna be able to go. And it was gonna be smart enough to figure out, I need to change these lights at these intervals as it goes. Are we there yet? Are we not there?
We're not there. Our system for that's very old. It does work, but that's something that, again, is very outdated. The Syntrax system, the traffic management system, that's kind of a separate entity of what we upgraded. It's yeah. Yeah, there is a preemption package that you can get with Syntrax. We do not have it.
So how can I get one of these things on my cars that are just gonna let me go?
You cannot have a clicker.
eBay.
I want a clicker, Randall.
No green light clicker.
I need a clicker. All right.
eBay.
Yeah, Randall didn't get one, so no one gets one. That's how it works. Yeah. All right, thank you. I appreciate the
You're
info.
welcome.
Any, Mrs. Bobbitt?
Charlie, could you tell me and the public that's viewing where these funds are coming from?
We actually have the funds. It was left over from the accounts in the traffic part of LDOT's funding. We're not asking for any money. It's just a matter of moving it around so that we can, there's a $50,000 cap. Otherwise, you have to go out to bid. And what we're requesting is,
He's right, but what, it's coming out of the increase in gasoline tax money that we got last year, so that's where these funds are coming forward from. And it, like you said, it's just leftover funds in traffic control that we're not going to be utilizing anyplace else this year.
Okay, thank you, both.
Okay. Anything else? I have Mr. James as your second and that you're asking for suspension.
Yes, please, and apologies to Charlie, because I
Charlie
told you I
did
wouldn't do
great.
it.
Charlie did
You
great.
did very well.
Anything else on this ordinance? Okay, thanks, Charlie.
thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other ordinances to come before finance? Okay, seeing none, are there any departmental updates this evening? Mrs. Nettles.
Yeah, I just wanted to let council know that I'll be bringing in on the next council meeting my annual budget cleanup piece. This is for the 2020 budget. I'm still working with departments to see, that maybe have not brought in the revenue that they anticipated this time last year. Due to COVID and all that stuff that they may be running short, so some people are probably gonna have to, lower their budgets to bring them in line with their actual cash. So I'm still working with departments, on that, but I'll be bringing it in for the next meeting.
Okay, thank you. Denise?
I just wanted to alert you, next meeting you will see two pieces of legislation, and it relates to the water plant improvements. And if your heads are spinning, mine is too. I went into a meeting today and said, I don't know which plant we're talking about in this meeting. The first piece of legislation will be engineering contracts. There'll probably be two. We have selected Arcadis and Burgess and Nyepel on the water plant upgrade and Burgess and Nyepel for water lines upgrade. So we'll have contracts for both of those. They're supposed to have those to us in the next week or two. And then the second piece will be selling bond anticipation notes to pay for the design of those projects, along with a water line upgrade out in the Rock Mill area. So I don't need any money until January, and we've already told the consultants that we won't sign the contracts till January. So those both can go to readings. I don't need those cleared off.
Okay. Yes, Mr. James?
Do you want to clarify which water plant you're talking about?
This is for the Miller Park Water Plant.
That's what I thought, yeah.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it.
Thank you. Are there any other departmental updates? All right, seeing none, I will turn it over to President Uhl for tonight's meeting prep.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Woman.
Whatever.
Whatever. The only thing I'll mention, just a couple things briefly. Temporary ordinance 14-20. I spoke with the director of the Board of Elections. They have certified the election. However, they're in their 5-day appeal period where people can appeal. Our election, thankfully, wasn't as slim of a margin to need to worry about any sort of, anyone contesting the election. And so we will plan to remove from the table temporary ordinance 14-20 and take action on that this evening. Ms. Bobbitt, we're going to need you to second that since Mr. Stoughton is not here. I'll also just ask that we be helpful to the clerk as we prepare for the 2021 legislative year and get all of your committee meetings that you're planning to schedule to her. Remember, it's easier to schedule and cancel than it is to schedule later on, and so go ahead and schedule what you think you're going to do, even though we don't know exactly what the year is going to look like. You all likely saw my conversation with Mr. Hall back and forth today on meetings, virtual meetings, and how we'll move forward into 2021. As of now, we're not planning to change, though the Ohio legislature did allow for us to extend virtual meetings into the new year, and so should we have need, we can consider that. But I would encourage you to get your committee meetings schedule them as you normally would, and get those dates to the clerk just as quickly as possible so that she can get those listed and posted out on the website. Finally, as you note, we are going to be here a little while tonight. We have a number of pieces of legislation, many of which we are suspending and passing on, and so let me encourage you that during what's really going to be somewhat of a short break here, to maintain social distance, wear your mask, but come to the clerk and sign your legislation as you can so that we can move that process along and not have big groups of people over here either at the break or at the end. So if you can't get it at the break, grab it at the end, but if you folks can make it this way to try to sign, that would be helpful. With that, I will turn it back to the chairwoman.
I just have one question for Clerk Sandy. How are you doing on minutes for your committee meetings? Do you have anybody that's still outstanding?
I do have outstanding ones. I don't have it with me this evening, but I do have at least 2 committees that I know have outstanding minutes.
Okay.
Always best to get those in as quickly as possible, and if we can do it by the end of the year, that will be very helpful to the clerk as well. So please get your minutes in, and the clerk can reach out to you individually for now, if you wouldn't mind, to let you know if you're missing minutes.
Thank you. Okay, the last thing that I have, other items for finance, is the budget for 2021. You all should have received a copy both in PDF form and in Excel. We've only received questions from Mr. Matlin, so I encourage all of you to look at it in detail and get your questions answered as soon as possible, because we will be looking to, I assume, pass the budget at the next meeting. So if you don't have access to Excel, please let us know. We can help you get it, but Mr. Stoughton and Mrs. Bobbitt and I will probably be reviewing it in great detail when Mr. Stoughton gets back from vacation. Okay? All right. Anything else for finance this evening? We had a lot.
Yes, we did.
Okay, Mrs. Bobbitt, could I have a motion to adjourn?
I make a motion that we adjourn.
I second. We are adjourned at 6:43 p.m.
The regular meeting of Lancaster City Council will begin at 6:50.
Here we go.
Good evening. Welcome to Lancaster City Council. Please join me in a word of prayer. Father, it is likely that no one would argue that this year has been one big old train wreck of a dumpster fire. And yet, Lord, in the midst of all that we've experienced, we have so much for which to be thankful. Specifically today, we are thankful for doctors and nurses, medical professionals who continue to serve on the front lines of this pandemic. We're thankful for scientists and researchers who continue forward with the development of a vaccine. We're thankful for first responders, Lord, who continue to put themselves in harm's way to serve the public and to help others. We continue to lift up and ask that you would be with our servicemen and women who are fighting to preserve, protect, and defend freedom around the world. We ask that you would be with and bless all of these groups, and we ask that you would be with the people of Lancaster, with this council, with the administration. We ask that you would be with each and every employee of the city of Lancaster. We are thankful for them now and throughout the year. Be with us tonight, Lord. Lead, guide, and direct us in the work that is set before us. May we do what is in the best interests of the citizens of Lancaster. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
I hereby call this meeting of Lancaster City Council to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt,
Here.
Mrs. Downhour,
Here.
Mr. Hall,
Here.
Mr. James,
Here.
Mr. Matlin,
Here.
Mr. McDaniel,
Here.
Mr. Schoonover,
Here.
Mr. Stoughton, and Mrs. Teener.
Let the record reflect that 7 of 9 members of City Council are in attendance this evening.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to excuse Councilman Stoughton and Councilman Teener from tonight's meeting.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to excuse Councilman Teener and Councilman Stoughton. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. They are excused. Reading and disposing of the journal.
I'd like to present the regular meeting minutes dated November the 11th, 2020.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion to receive and file the journal.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to receive and file the journal. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Reports of city officials.
There are two series of emails dated November 18th, 2020 regarding cancellation of the Safety Committee meeting submitted by Mrs. Bobbitt. And finally, an email dated November 18th, 2020 regarding cancellation of Safety Committee meeting submitted by Chief Ward.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the reports of city officials.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file reports of city officials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any communications?
There is one. Notice to the legislative authority of a transfer of a liquor license from Main Street Bistro LLC doing business as The Bistro located at 123 North Broad Street, first floor basement and patio, Lancaster, Ohio 43130, to the Downtown Bistro LLC doing business as The Bistro located at 123 North Broad Street, first floor basement and patio, Lancaster, Ohio 43130, submitted by the Ohio Division of Liquor Control.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion to receive and file the communications.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to receive and file communications. All those in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Are there any petitions or memorials?
There's nothing to be presented.
During this time at Lancaster City Council, we set time aside to allow the voters and taxpayers to address City Council on any item or issue that they would like. Before I go through the whole spiel, is there anyone who'd like to address City Council tonight? If not, then we'll just say thank you for being here, and we'll move on to the next agenda item. Are there reports of standing committees?
There are none to be presented.
Are there reports of special committees?
There are none to be presented.
We have no public hearings this evening, so we'll move to the reading of resolutions, beginning with the second reading of temporary resolution 117-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the various construction administration services for the Lawrence Street Water Pollution Control Facility improvement projects, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Even though we didn't really talk about this one in the Finance Committee meeting, this is to actually hire a project management team for the upgrade at Lawrence Street, and it's to the, in the amount of $3.5 million. And at this point in time, I would like to address or ask that, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 117-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 117-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 7-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, I now would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record resolution temporarily numbered 117-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 117-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 117-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 118-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering contract, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mrs. Teener.
Mr. James.
This is the second of three readings.
Second reading on temporary resolution 118-20. Temporary resolution 119-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into a contract for inspection services, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
This is also the second of three readings.
Second reading on temporary resolution 119-20. Temporary resolution 120-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the 2021 Sewer Evaluation and Rehabilitation Program design, offered by Mr. James and seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Even though we didn't really cover this in the Finance Committee meeting, this is actually to promote getting an opportunity to evaluate all of our sewers. And we've talked about this in previous Finance Committee meetings. So at this time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution number 120-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary resolution 120-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Before I call the roll, I will let you know, I missed this one for signatures for all three of you, so just
Right.
to let you know. I'll hold it aside. Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Mr. James?
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution number 120-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 120-20. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 120-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 121-20.
A resolution to make appropriations for current 2021 budget expenses and other expenditures of the City of Lancaster, State of Ohio, for the fiscal year 2021, and to establish line item transfer authority for departments, offered by Mrs. Bobbitt, second by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you. Second reading.
Second reading on temporary resolution 121-20.
No, she needs to do the amendment.
Oh, we're amending it. Yeah, we gotta amend that, Ms. Bobbitt.
We gotta amend that.
Yes, we do.
I put the
I make a
motion in front
motion
of her.
that we amend temporary resolution number 12120 and replace it with 12120 star.
Second?
Motion is second to amend temporary resolution 121-20 with resolution 121-20 stars given to clerk in writing prior to tonight's meeting. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt.
As we talked a little, some in finance, we had some great questions, and we're going to have more questions to come and more answers to come.
Very good. Other discussion on the motion to amend? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Motion to amend passes 7-0. We now have before us 121-20 star. Ms. Bobbitt?
Second reading, please.
Second reading on temporary resolution 121-20 star. We have first reading on a series of resolutions, beginning with temporary resolution 123-20.
A resolution to create a new fund for .45 police and levy, police and fire levy to 2021 fund 2051, and to set up revenue and expense accounts, offered by Mrs. Downhour, second by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First reading on temporary resolution 123-20, temporary resolution 124-20.
A resolution appropriating CARES Act funds to cover payroll and benefit expenses of employees substantially dedicated to the mitigating and responding to the COVID-19 public health emergency, and to payroll expenses for employees infected directly impacted by COVID-19, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 124-20.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 124-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Ms. Downhour?
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 124-20.
Second.
Motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 124-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We discussed this in the Finance Committee meeting, and this is to allow us to use the CARE Act money for payroll expenditures and benefit expenditures in the police department and fire department. We asked to suspend it this evening so we can get the funds in the account.
Very good, thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt?
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Mr. James?
Yes.
Mr. Matlin?
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel?
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover?
Yes.
Temporary resolution 124-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 125-20.
A resolution to increase receipts appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the local coronavirus relief fund 2050, amend their certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, second by Mrs. Bobbit.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 125-20.
Second?
Motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 125-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Not at this time.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Ms. Downhour.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 125-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 125-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. We discussed this in the Finance Committee as well, and basically, the county is redistributing the countywide CARES Act funds, and so this will allow the city of Lancaster to get those funds in. It'll total $161,297.98. So we want to pass tonight to get those funds in our account.
Thank you, Ms. Downhour. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 125-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 126-20.
A resolution to appropriate from the unencumbered balance in the Stormwater Utility Fund 6006 and amend the certificate of other sources and appropriations with the county auditor. Offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, as we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, this helps in the amount of about $450,000 to finish up a lot of the projects that are now on tap for this year for completion. And at this time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution number 126-20.
Second.
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 126-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Mr. James.
Yes, at this time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution numbered 126-20.
Second.
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 126-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Temporary resolution 126-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 127-20.
A resolution to authorize the payment of a claim for damages to a sanitary sewer lateral as part of the downtown revitalization project and issue a then and now certificate. Offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
Yes, as we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, there was a problem found with the a lateral that had been damaged long time ago, and this particular owner of 117 North Columbus Street didn't use a lot of water, therefore it was undiscovered for a long time. So at this point, Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution numbered 127-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 127-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Mr. James.
Yes, Mr. President, I now would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 127-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 127-20. Discussion, Mr. James.
I have nothing to add.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes. Yes.
That was a yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to pass. Temporary Resolution 128-20 passes 7-0. Temporary Resolution 129-20.
128.
128.
I didn't want to do that one.
You didn't.
Temporary Resolution 128-20.
A resolution authorizing the Service Safety Director to advertise for bids for the South Water Plant Concentrate Line Upgrade Project, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James.
This particular concentrate line from the South Water Treatment Plant all the way back to the Lawrence Street Treatment Facility has had a problem with some debris in the line, forcing them to not be able to operate the plant at full capacity. Therefore, this is really essential for us to be able to expand the capability at that plant. So at this point in time, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution number 128-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 128-20. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing to add.
Discussion on the motion to pass, or to suspend, sorry. I'll get it right one of these days. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Mr. James?
Mr. President, now at this time, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 128-20.
Second?
A motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 128-20. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 128-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 129-20.
A resolution to authorize the Service Safety Director to enter into an engineering agreement for the Upper Hocking Water Pollution Control Facility Expansion Project Design, offered by Mr. James, seconded by Mr. Hall.
Mr. James?
This particular resolution is the opportunity to look at expanding our Upper Hocking Water Pollution Control Facility from the 2 million gallons per day treatment that is the capacity. We are now experiencing about 1.8 million gallons per day, and it's time for us to take a look at the expansion with the opportunities we have for additional businesses to come into the city. So, Mr. President, at this time, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution numbered 129-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 129-20. Discussion, Mr. James?
Nothing further?
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 7-0. Mr. James?
Mr. President, I now would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon our written record temporary resolution numbered 129-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 129-20. Mr. James?
The only thing I might add to it is that this is in the amount of approximately $2 million for this review, this engineering review. And that's all I have for that.
Thank you, Mr. James. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
and Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 129-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 130-20.
A resolution to decrease and increase appropriations in the General Fund 1001 Municipal Clerk's Office, can't get that out, offered by Mrs. Downhour, second by Mrs. Bobbit.
Ms. Downow?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of resolution temporarily numbered 130-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary resolution 130-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
Not right now.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall,
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel,
Yes.
Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Motion to suspend carries 7-0. Ms. Downow?
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record resolution temporarily numbered 130-20.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution 130-20. Discussion, Ms. Downer?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. As we discussed in the Finance Committee meeting, this resolution is to cover a deficit that was created when there was a full-time employee who had single coverage of health care in the municipal clerk's office, replaced by an employee who has selected family coverage. It's in the amount of $13,000.
Thank you. Further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 130-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 131-20.
A resolution to authorize the issuance of one then and now certificate for payment of an invoice for the gas fund. Offered by Mrs. Bobbit, second by Mr. Matlin.
Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to make a motion that we suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading on temporary resolution number 13120.
Second.
With a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading, temporary resolution 131-20. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt.
No discussion right now.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin,
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Ms. Bobbitt.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary resolution number 13120.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record, temporary resolution 131-20. Discussion, Ms. Bobbitt.
As we heard from Kurt Wade during finance, they have the funds available at the gas department. This is to change out, make things better in a gas line.
Thank you, Ms. Bobbitt. Is there further discussion on the motion to pass? Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary resolution 131-20 passes 7-0. Temporary resolution 132-20.
A resolution authorizing the mayor to enter into a contract with the Fairfield County General Health District for public health services, offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First two readings on temporary resolution 132-20. Are there any further resolutions to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? If not, we'll move to the reading of ordinances, beginning with the second reading of temporary ordinance 25-20.
An ordinance to repeal and replace Lancaster Codified Ordinance, Part 1, Administrative Code, Title 9, Taxation, Chapter 183, Municipal Income Tax, effective January 1st, 2018, of the codified ordinances of the City of Lancaster, and to declare an emergency, offered by Mr. Hall, seconded by Mr. McDaniel.
Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. President, I'd like to attempt to get this motion correct this week. This motion was presented at our last meeting, essentially deals with the city's capability or ability to require employers to submit income tax information electronically. Will result in a significant benefit to the city from an efficiency standpoint. And at this time, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 25-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the third reading of temporary ordinance 25-20. Discussion, Mr. Hall.
No further discussion, please.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend carries 7-0. Mr. Hall.
Yes, Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 25-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 25-20. Mr. Hall.
No further discussion, please.
Discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbit,
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour,
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James,
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Temporary ordinance 25-20 passes 7-0. We now have first reading on a series of ordinances, beginning with temporary ordinance 26-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 26-20, temporary ordinance 27-20.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for Fairfield County Municipal Court judicial and probation personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 27-20, temporary ordinance 28-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for management and professional personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First of two readings on temporary ordinance 28-20, temporary ordinance 29-20.
And an ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for those employed who are not members of the recognized bargaining units employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First reading on temporary ordinance 29-20, temporary ordinance 30-20.
An ordinance to establish benefits, titles, and compensation for transit personnel employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio for the year 2021 and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mr. Stoughton.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First two readings on temporary ordinance 30-20, temporary ordinance 31-20.
An ordinance to establish the benefits, titles, and compensation for the Information Technology Administrator, Office of the Clerk of Court, employed by the City of Lancaster, Ohio, commencing the first pay period of 2021, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
First of two readings, please.
First reading on temporary ordinance 31-20, temporary ordinance 32-20.
An ordinance to dispense with competitive bidding and enter into a contract with GridSmart for proprietary traffic management cameras and upgrade processing units based on the sole source doctrine. Offered by Mr. Schoonover and seconded by Mr. James.
Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 3220.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to suspend the rules and waive the second and third reading of temporary ordinance 32-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
No thanks.
Discussion on the motion to suspend. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
Motion to suspend passes 7-0. Mr. Schoonover.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 3220.
Second?
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 32-20. Discussion, Mr. Schoonover.
Yeah, as we discussed in finance, this gives us an opportunity to get some end-of-the-year discounts on upgrading some of our traffic management cameras with new technology that we're desperately in need of. So that is why we asked for suspension and have asked to pass this resolution, or ordinance, I'm sorry.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Temporary ordinance 32-20 passes 7-0. Are there any further ordinances to come before Lancaster City Council this evening? Yes, Ms. Bobbitt?
Time to take this one off the table right now?
As soon as we get to table legislation.
I'm sorry.
You're there.
I am just so ahead of myself.
No, it's time right now.
Okay,
Go for it.
go for it.
Let's have it.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we remove from the table temporary ordinance number 1420.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to remove from the table temporary ordinance 14-20. This motion is not debatable. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes.
The motion carries and temporary ordinance 14-20 is now taken from the table and is before us. I'll ask that the clerk please read the preamble.
An ordinance to amend section 183.012, 183.013, and 183.02 of the codified ordinances of the City of Lancaster, Ohio, in order to provide for the levy of an additional 45/100 of 1%, 0.45% income tax effective January 1st, 2021 on the salaries, wages, commission, and other compensation subject to the municipal income tax, with all such tax to be used for the purpose of operating, maintaining, repairing, and providing capital facilities for the fire and police departments of the city, and to declare an emergency. Offered by Mrs. Downhour, seconded by Mrs. Bobbitt.
Ms. Downhour.
Mr. President, I would like to make a motion that council suspend its rules and waive the third reading of ordinance temporarily numbered 14-20.
Second?
No, is that the third reading?
Yeah, we
That
just
was
had
the
three
third.
readings, so you
Sorry.
can just make a motion to pass. It's okay.
Said two.
Yeah, it was 2 readings.
Okay.
And now we've had 3.
Rewind.
So we're good.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that council pass, engross, and enter upon the written record ordinance temporarily numbered 14-20.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to pass, engross, and enter upon the written record temporary ordinance 14-20. Discussion, Ms. Downhour?
Yes, Mr. President, this ordinance has been on the table for quite some time. It corresponded with the tax levy that was recently on the ballot, and the election has been certified, so now we need to pass this ordinance.
Very good. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Yes, Ms. Bobbitt?
Along with the administration and probably everyone sitting around this table, I'd like to thank the public for passing the levy.
Here. Well said.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. Further discussion on the motion to pass. Please call the roll.
Mrs. Bobbitt.
Yes.
Mrs. Downhour.
Yes.
Mr. Hall.
Yes.
Mr. James.
Yes.
Mr. Matlin.
Yes.
Mr. McDaniel.
Yes.
And Mr. Schoonover.
Yes. Temporary ordinance 14-20 passes 7-0. Is there any unfinished business tonight to come before Lancaster City Council? Is there any new business this evening anyone would like to discuss? I'll just mention a couple things very briefly. The first one is, I'm not sure, it's all melding together at this point, but one of our own was recognized by the Lancaster Fairfield County Chamber of Commerce a few weeks ago during their annual meeting and awards for winning the first ever Nonprofit of the Year award, and that was Mr. Schoonover and the Fairfield County Humane Society. I think we glazed over it last time. Congratulations to you and to your gang. Thank you for the work that you do. Let's show our congratulations to Mr. Schoonover and his gang. Very good. Upon discussion with members of the Finance Committee who are here, a special Finance Committee meeting is being called for Monday, December 7th at 6 p.m. The proposed location is the 1897 room. The clerk will confirm that. The purpose of the meeting is to discuss the budget. And so we will have on that Friday before received the requested justification documentation regarding new positions and any range or salary increases. And so we'll have that to discuss, as well as any other questions that you may have. Again, let me encourage you, though, if you have questions between now and then, the mayor has offered multiple times to meet with anyone one-on-one who would like to do so. Please take him up on that if you have questions. If you're going to email back and forth, please remember to reply all so that we can all see the answers and the questions and be better informed about what we're getting ready to vote on. Any questions or comments? That's a Finance Committee meeting. Members of Finance are planning to be there. It is open to the public, obviously, and any member of council is welcome to attend.
What
as
time
well.
is that, President Old?
6 p.m. Anything else on that, Ms. Downhour?
No.
Any other new business to come before Lancaster City Council? If not, then let me just briefly say happy Thanksgiving to each one of you. This will be the last time we meet before Thanksgiving. We have one more meeting left this year, and wish you and your families a very happy Thanksgiving.
Likewise.
Thank you. We'll ask that the clerk please read the upcoming scheduled meetings.
Upcoming scheduled meetings, December 14th, 6:30 p.m. here in council chambers. The meeting following is January the 11th at 6:30 p.m. I'm not gonna read finance under special meetings, because I always save that for, actual council meetings, so I'm gonna read it under upcoming committee meetings, if that's okay. Service Committee, December 4th at 7:30 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. Code Enforcement and Zoning, December 7th at 8 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. Special Finance Committee, on December 7th at 6 p.m. and pending the 1897 room availability. Water Pollution, December 9th at 8 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. Public Works, December the 11th, 7:30 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room. Finance, December 14th, 6 p.m. Council Chambers here. And finally, the Economic Development, December 17th at 7:30 a.m. at the City Hall 1897 Conference Room.
Thank you very much. Are there any bills this evening?
There are none to be presented.
Is there a need for an executive session? If not, a motion to adjourn is in order.
Mr. President, I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn the meeting. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. Thank you very much. We are adjourned. Again, may you and everyone watching today have a very happy Thanksgiving.
There is no place like Lancaster, Ohio, and Fairfield County, and like you, I am proud to call them home. As a longtime resident of Lancaster and graduate of Lancaster High School, this community is important to me, and I want to provide superior customer service, professionalism, integrity, and honesty at the Connor Insurance Agency. I am committed to supporting local programs and projects through my volunteer work and board membership with several organizations. It has been a great honor to work with all the first responders throughout Lancaster, Fairfield County, and the state of Ohio to put on Kids and Cops Day, to be a part of Shop with a Cop alongside the Lancaster Police Department and JFS, and to help Lancaster Public Education Foundation raise funds to support our local public schools and teachers. These men and women work hard to protect and support our community, and I would like to take this moment to say thank you for all they do. My goal as a business owner and insurance agent is to provide my clients with the most appropriate services and coverage for their needs at a competitive rate. As an independent agent, I have several carriers to choose from so I can customize your insurance coverage to fit your needs and desires. I strive to make sure there are no gaps in your coverage that could be harmful, and just as important, that you are not overinsured. I look forward to serving your insurance needs now and in the future. At Connor Insurance, we are here to serve you by protecting what is important to you. Please contact my office at 740-654-2848 for a full list of services and carriers, or visit my website, ConnorInsuranceAgency.com.
The Frankie Smith Funeral Home and Crematory in Lancaster and the Johnson Smith Funeral Home in Baltimore have a long and wonderful history of serving our community. Feel free to give us a call at 740-653-0652. Stop in and see us at either of our two locations, 405 North Columbus Street in Lancaster and 207 South Main Street in Baltimore. Respect for tradition, regard for change.
Swing into the Carriage Company and check out our sweet deals.
If you're looking for the best selection of clean, quality used vehicles, look no further than the Carriage Company. You'll feel secure with your purchase, knowing all vehicles undergo an extensive safety and service check prior to the sale. And all vehicles can be viewed online at carriagecompany.com. The Carriage Company, located at 1031 North Memorial Drive in Lancaster.
So wait!